Jawaharlal Nehru expressed the feelings of hundreds of millions of people in India and abroad. The light has gone out of our lives, and there is darkness everywhere. Our beloved leader, Bapu, as we called him, the father of the nation, is no more. The light has gone out, I said, and yet I was wrong. For the light that shone in this country was no ordinary light. 1,000 years later, that light will still be seen in the country, and the world will see it. From the martyrdom of Gandhi emerged a philosophy which is also a standard for moral and spiritual conduct, not only for nations, but also for individual people all over the world. The UN lowers its flag in tribute.
That we who sit here charged with the grave responsibility of maintaining peace among nations should pay tribute to this great Indian leader. His tragic death constitutes as grievous a loss to Pakistan as it is to India. He was the man who said that faith transcends reason, that God has his footstool where lives the poorest and the loneliest and the lost. But our conviction that Gandhi has not lived and has not died in vain. We have lost our biggest man. If I may venture to say so, the world has lost its tallest man, judged by all moral standards.
Albert Einstein said, "Generations to come, it may be, will scarce believe that such a one as this, ever in flesh and blood, walked upon this earth." The world honors this man. We call him the Mahatma. But are we really honoring his memory, or merely converting his dynamic teachings into empty slogans? We continue to pay lip service to his ideas and betray them in daily life. We adulate him, but forget that part of his greatness lay in his simplicity and forthrightness. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi was an ordinary boy, an average child with no sense of mission whatsoever. His grandfather and father were administrators attached to the Raja of Porbandar, a small state in western India on the shores of the Arabian Sea. The language of his childhood was Gujarati. In the Gujarat of the late 19th century, there existed a profound influence of Jainism. It was Mahavir who first spoke of the essence of non-violence, of not violating the harmony of nature. Mohandas's mother, a religious woman by temperament, introduced him to the teachings of Mahavir and some of the Gujarati saints and poets. The seeds of non-violence as a concept were being sown early in his life. On finishing with the boredom of academic stuff, the young Mohandas decided to go to England to be a barrister. Gandhi was a Vaishnav. He belonged to a class of people known as Vanyas, and they believed that going across the sea was a sin. So they excommunicated Mohandas, and he was never readmitted to this caste. His mother makes him promise to remember to say his prayers, not to smoke or drink, and not to eat meat. In London, he felt lonely and lost in an alien environment. He has himself recorded how he wept bitter tears, thinking of his mother and the comforts of home. In London, Gandhi was compelled to live frugally on his meager allowance. Much to Gandhi's surprise, there existed in London in the 1880s an active vegetarian society. Its members believed not only that it was wrong to kill animals, but that a vegetarian diet was conducive to better health. In London, he began to devour the literature of Western humanism. Mohandas read books on Buddhism, such as Matthew Arnold's Light of Asia. In Christianity, too, he found most appealing the concept of non-violence. He was greatly influenced by the Sermon on the Mount. Moreover, from Ruskin, he learned a comprehensive moral code, respect for the law, and harmony with nature. From Tolstoy, he learned to value the dignity of labor and respect for the farmer and all working people. While his ideas were taking shape in his mind, he completed his studies and was called to the bar. When he returned to India, Gandhi did not do too well as a lawyer, partly because he was hesitant in speaking in court, but mainly because he did not believe in litigation, when negotiation could solve a problem out of court. This characteristic persisted throughout his life. He was fortunate when he was invited to go to South Africa by a group of Muslim businessmen. One of the biggest physical, emotional, and moral shocks of his life occurred when he entered a first-class railway compartment. He had a reservation, but because some whites were to travel, he was thrown out. Even so, he did not hate white South Africans. He hated the system, and he decided to fight it. It was in South Africa that we see the beginnings of tolerance in Gandhi. The Boer War broke out between the Dutch settlers and imperialistic Britain in 1899. Irrespective of who was fighting who in the Boer War, Gandhi chose to work in an ambulance corps to look after injured Africans. Not only injuries in war, social injustice of the worst kind was inflicted on non-whites. For the most part, the whites treated them like chattel or animals and referred to them as dirty dog. It was in response to this inhumanity that Gandhi helped to found the African National Congress.
Apartheid was formally institutionalized in 1910, but in its most vicious form in 1948, when the ruling Nationalist Party assumed power. So from 1948 until now, we have the system known as apartheid in South Africa, and which, as you know, is a system of human administration in which a small white minority maintains power by force and violence and continues the brutal subjugation of the vast majority of black South Africans for the benefit of a few white South Africans.
After Gandhi, Nelson Mandela stands out as an honorable example of finding a way to liberate a people from oppression, want and poverty. When he was released from prison, Nelson Mandela came to India to receive the Bharat Ratna, India's highest award. The Gandhian spirit of tolerance and reconciliation was evident after Nelson Mandela became the President of South Africa. On his second visit to India, he said,
India was the first country to voice the abhorrence of apartheid to the world. We salute you in the name of the African National Congress and the millions of the oppressed, fighting people of South Africa. India's link with South Africa in respect of the liberation struggle thus goes back to the days of this great man, Mahatma Gandhi, whose 21 years stay in South Africa are looked upon by us as important years for humanity. With that historic background of our fraternal struggle, we are here to further cement fraternal commitment to continue till victory is achieved. Our victory will be your victory. Indeed, victory for the entire world.
Gopal Krishna Gokhale, a doyen of the freedom movement who had visited South Africa, had been so impressed by Gandhi's weapon of satyagraha that he invited him to return to India. Gandhi was given an enthusiastic welcome by everyone, except, of course, the British and his own caste. In the midst of celebration, Mohandas was still an outcast. On Gokhale's advice, Gandhi undertook a long journey throughout India, a sort of Bharat Darshan, to acquaint himself with conditions in India. Gandhi noticed a great deal of political consciousness, but at the same time he saw that the average Indian was timid and submissive, that society was divided and superstitious, that the country was poor and exploited, and that the villagers were as neglected and desolate as before. After educating himself on Indian realities, when he did decide to enter the political arena, he did so having made a final decision. For the people, with the people. It was easy for the masses to understand Gandhi because he spoke their language. He lived as they lived, dressed as they did, and so they identified with him. By Satya, he meant not only truth, but justice. By Ahimsa, he meant not only non-violence, but love for all living things. Gandhi's doctrine of satyagraha was first tested in the Champaran district of Bihar. He was invited to inquire into the grievances of agriculturalists who were forced to cultivate indigo by oppressive and corrupt planters. First, Gandhi talked to the planters, against whom there was clear evidence of corruption. Once their confidence was won over, Gandhiji got their full cooperation in abolishing the oppressive system of indigo plantation. So it was that the workers of Bihar and in other parts of India came to realize the importance of Gandhi's insistence on negotiation instead of confrontation.
Non-violence, far from being a merely negative term, signified love, love that is infinite and abounding, love that is pristine and pure. No doubt, in India there were saints like Gautama the Buddha and Mahavira who had preached non-violence, but it was left to Mahatma Gandhi to apply it to the problems that we face in the social, economic, political and international fields.
Considering the terrible plight of the common people, Gandhi decided to defy the imposition of a tax on salt, the basic need of human beings. This led to the famous Salt March to Dandi. This mass movement of people for a cause became symbolic of an entire nation on the march to freedom. Gandhi established an ashram on the banks of the Sabarmati in Gujarat and later shifted to Wardha in Maharashtra. Many visitors from different parts of the world and of course the subcontinent came to visit him. Among them was Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, who was later to be known as the Frontier Gandhi. In his own words, "We went every day to Gandhi and joined him at prayers. Once it so happened that the Bhangi threw up his job and ran away. When this was reported to Gandhiji, he said, 'Well, let's go with broom and bucket and clean up the place.' And so we went and attended to the sanitation. Another thing that impressed me about him was his humorous disposition. He would laugh with all the girls and the boys, the young and the old. He had a great sense of humor. His heart was full of love and concerned in the service of God's children. It was his courteous manner, the simple insistence on freedom without violence, which had an influence on people in different parts of the world who suffered from inequality. An important example was the American Martin Luther King, who said that he was fascinated by Gandhi's idea of refusing to cooperate with an evil system. It was this idea which led to the strengthening of the civil rights movement in America and King's influence with John Kennedy and his government. In the words of King's biographer, both held no public office, yet both exerted more power and gained more adulation than most elected statesmen of their time. Both were charismatic, votaries of non-violence. Both, ironically, died by the bullet.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream.
Martin Luther's widow, Mrs. Coretta King, came to India to receive the Nehru Award for International Understanding on behalf of her late husband. In the same way as Gandhiji began, by refusing to pay tax on salt, Mrs. King says,
"It was a simple act of non-cooperation with a bus company which refused to acknowledge the basic dignity of Negro citizens. But from that simple act of truth emerged a movement which has had profound implications on the whole of American life and the world in which we live.
This tribute to Satyagraha has much more than a political significance. It has an enduring spiritual significance. We met an American lady who has adopted the name Kamala. She has been the director of the Gandhi Center in Washington since its dedication more than 20 years ago.
Gandhi, in his campaign, when he used the word Satyagraha, perhaps in India you identify it more with a historical freedom movement and with that campaign. Yet Gandhi himself described Satyagraha just in these three expressions: self-purification, self-dedication, and selflessness. So Satyagraha applies today in America and in any other country in those three attributes of the human quest for truth.
As national consciousness spread and Indians began to clamor for freedom, the Congress in 1930 called for Purna Swarajya, total independence. This frightened the votaries of the Raj, and a conference was arranged in London. Gandhi went to England as the sole representative of the Indian National Congress and insisted on the principle of universal franchise. But the Muslim League, together with the Rajas and Nawabs, sabotaged this proposal, and the British got what they wanted: to have separate electorates on the basis of religion and caste. Gandhi was disgusted, but before he returned to India, he spent time with the working class people of Manchester and London. He then went to Switzerland to meet the wise man of the West, as he called Romé Roland. He told Romé Roland and his faithful English companion Miraben, and indeed the public of India and the world, I am not conscious of a single experience throughout my 3-month stay in England and Europe that made me feel that after all, East is East and West is West. On the contrary, I have been convinced more than ever that human nature is much the same, no matter under what climate flourishes, and that if you approached people with trust and affection, you would have 10-fold trust and 1,000-fold affection returned to you. This was especially true of the untouchables, the victims of the caste system who could not even draw water from the village well. Gandhi called them Harijans, the children of God. He fought a long and epic battle against the forces of entrenched orthodoxy. He started a weekly journal, the Harijan, dealing with the problems of the depressed classes. When he traveled to collect money for the welfare of the Harijans, it was the poor people who responded with their pitifully small but heartfelt contributions. Gandhi's relentless efforts finally led to some temples being opened to Harijans. In the span of half a lifetime, Gandhi had overturned thousands of years of oppression. Soon Gandhi called for the boycott of all foreign goods, and this led to a nationwide movement which spread like wildfire and reinforced the movement for Swadeshi. When Gandhi was arrested and charged with sedition, the magistrate, a kindly Englishman, referred to the regard in which Indians held him and apologized for having brought him to court. Gandhi told the magistrate that it was his duty to sentence Gandhi in the same way it was Gandhi's duty to fight against inequality of the British Raj. The spinning wheel has been used as a symbol of time passing, but for Gandhi, it was an act of faith in the self-sufficiency of the Indian people. The act of spinning was to him a meditation of oneness of life, of the interdependence of capital and labor, man and nature. He wanted a social order which would secure the greatest good of all, Sarvodaya. He wanted a simple society in which economic progress and social justice would go together. During the First World War, Gandhiji had helplessly watched as nearly 120,000 young Indian men were killed in a war not of their making, a European war, utterly irrelevant to India. When the Second World War broke out, Gandhiji, Nehru, and other national leaders who were against fascism agreed to fight along with the British and the Allied forces. But they insisted that once the war was over, India should be given independence. Independence was to be non-negotiable. Winston Churchill, who once called Gandhiji a naked fakir, refused to countenance this proposition. Gandhi had no choice but to launch the Quit India movement. The nation responded to his call of do or die. Do or die, not with violence, but with ahimsa, non-violent, non-cooperation. Almost all national leaders were lodged in prison. After the war ended, a cabinet mission came from England to meet Indian leaders in Simla. By this time, there was a proposal for partitioning India, and it was bitterly opposed by Gandhiji and a few leaders like Maulana Azad. Gandhi met Jinnah. He pleaded for communal harmony and the prevention of a partition of the great cultural heritage of the subcontinent. Jinnah would not listen. Gandhi pleaded with Wavell, the viceroy, who was sympathetic. However, he was replaced by Mountbatten, who was polite but short-sighted. He refused to accept Gandhi's plea to save the subcontinent from havoc. Eventually, the Indian National Congress accepted the idea of partition, despite the dissenting voices of Gandhiji and Maulana Azad. Mountbatten, the viceroy, then set a date for the birth of the new states of Pakistan and India. On August 15, 1947, when the whole nation was celebrating independence, there was one man sitting alone, sad and dejected, at having allowed his motherland to be torn apart. Delhi was aflame with communal violence. Elsewhere, tempers were running high. Riots broke out in Noakhali in East Bengal. Mahatma Gandhi and Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan rushed to the riot-afflicted area. Tireless in his pursuit of communal harmony, the pilgrim progressed. His technique of non-violence was on trial. Gandhi undertook a fast unto death to make warring factions realize the futility of communal hatred. He said, "Death to me will be a glorious deliverance, rather than that I should be a helpless witness to the destruction of India." There were hurried consultations between the leaders of various communities. They realized the need to save human lives and to save Gandhi. They took pledge to maintain communal harmony, and Gandhi broke his fast. As Gandhi and Azad had feared, there was communal violence and butchery on a horrifying scale, and an immigration of populations never before witnessed in the history of the world. An interesting parallel can be drawn in the case of the two Germanys. Two eminent German intellectuals, Heisenberg and Kissinger, said on the occasion of Gandhi's birth centenary that the German problem could be solved along Gandhian lines, and they taught their students to believe in non-violence. This belief led to the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the reunification of Germany. What a pity that India and Pakistan cannot do this. Jawaharlal Nehru said it many years ago, and Gandhi's biographer, Louis Fisher, echoes the thought. India has impoverished itself by exporting its finest treasures. It gave birth to Buddha. Now, hundreds of millions follow him outside India, and only a handful inside. India's earth and air nurtured Gandhiji. How many Gandhians can be counted in his native country? Is Gandhiji to become the lost Mahatma? In the words of the late Justice M.C. Chagla, Gandhiji has suffered and is suffering the same fate. There is hardly a platform where his name is not uttered. The most dishonest, the most disreputable, and the most corrupt politicians capitalize on his name. And every day he is being assassinated again and again, not in body, but in spirit. On the 30th of January every year, people congregate not to lament the death of Gandhi, but in the hope that Gandhi's hope for humanity will move closer to realization. And it is astonishing to many people to be told that Gandhi's ideals are also enshrined in the UNO's Declaration of Human Rights. Even today, Mahatma Gandhi is the most universally quoted exponent of peace in the United Nations. In the words of Dr. Radhakrishnan, Gandhi worked for a major change in human nature. This is the voice of the age to come, and not that which is fading away.